I knew was wrong in my 12-year-old brain. I knew not only would I not get justice, but there isn't even mechanisms for justice. So what happened to me didn't matter, therefore I don't matter.
I didn't have a childhood. I didn't have a teenage life. I didn't, when I was in my 20s, all I was doing was I was in hospital or in education.
To me, I get 15 cases of FGM survivors every time I go on a TikTok live. So if you're telling me that FGM, let's say the percentage of the girls that are being cut maybe monthly or yearly is going down, I'll tell you no. If it's going down, then I shouldn't be getting all these girls who are survivors of female genital mutilation.
Hi, my name is Blessing Femi, and you're listening to Beyond the Silence, a podcast that takes on the quote-unquote taboo topics of the world, centering invisible voices at the forefront of real, uncomfortable, and necessary conversations. In each episode, we break the silence around issues that are too often ignored in today's society, from gender-based violence and cultural stigma to the politics of whose stories get told and who's left out. On today's episode, we'll be focusing on female genital mutilation, or FGM as abbreviated, a harmful practice that's affected and still affects over millions of girls across the globe. But for some unknown reason, this conversation is usually sidelined when it comes to UK discourse, in comparison to other forms of violence against women. We'll be hearing directly from survivors, experts, and people fighting to bring change towards the communities affected and the narratives created. Before we delve into this topic any further, a disclaimer is most definitely needed. Today's discussion will be focused around topics and themes related to female genital mutilation, including descriptions of psychological and physical trauma. Listeners' discretion is advised. Throughout this episode, I've aimed to approach this topic with as much care, respect, and awareness when engaging in these conversations with these real people behind these stories, without sensationalizing their trauma. But before we go any further, let's take a moment to ground ourselves in the basics. What exactly is female genital mutilation?
It's when a young girl's genitals are mutilated in the sense that they either have parts of it removed or some of it is stitched. Things like piercings and tattooing or anything done to a woman's genitalia as a child where she can't consent is basically comes under the umbrella of female genital mutilation.
That was Warda Mohammed. We'll be hearing more from her later. This then leads us to a critical question. Why exactly is it still happening? To get these answers, I spoke to Dr. Hilary Barrage, a sociologist and activist whose work is much focused on the health and safety of children, as well as gender-based violence, in particular female genital mutilation, in which she has researched and written 2 books about.
FGM is often seen in communities where it occurs as a mark of purity. By purity, they mean virginity. And there is this idea that girls have got to be pure or they're not good brides.
When I first began exploring this topic, I noticed a pattern. Many media outlets tended to frame FGM as something distant or disconnected, often emphasizing who practices it and where the individuals come from, a cultural practice which the UK had no part or say in. So, I was left with this lingering question. Is that really just the case? Is FGM really just nothing more than just a cultural practice with no deeper meaning or explanation behind it? Of course not. But in order to properly and fully explain why, I spoke to Nai Mukami, an emergency medic and owner of the Peony Wave in Kenya, a clinic that offers affordable healthcare for reconstructive surgery, as well as psychological services for women affected by this practice.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you so much again. How has your day been so far?
It was good. You can see me well.
Yeah, I can see you. It's okay, it's been recorded. How does the framing of FGM as a cultural issue rather than a human rights violation affect global efforts to combat it?
Because it undermines the urgency to address it as a human rights violation. When we say that, when you frame FGM as a cultural practice, we forget that these are young girls from the age of 4 who are being hurt, who are being put in a position where they won't be able to enjoy a normal life without all the complications. So when you say it's a cultural issue, we really undermine the urgency to address it as a human rights violation. It discourages a survivor. It really discourages a survivor to speak up. I've seen it over the years. It discourages them to speak up, and it shifts the focus from the harm it causes.
A similar experience is shared by Huda Ali, founder of the Avengers, a charity that campaigns against female genital mutilation both in the UK and globally. As a survivor herself, Huda not only advocates for the rights of girls, but also brings her personal lived experiences to the forefront of her work.
Survivors we have are not just Africa, we have survivors all around the world. So it's about time we look at FGM as a worldwide issue. And also we need to change our language, because a lot of it's a culture and it's religion. It's not. It's abuse, and it's a child abuse. And we have to say as it is, because also the language around it doesn't make it as dangerous as it is, right? So we need to, because when somebody say, oh, it's your culture, I'm like, is it my culture? So when you really look into your culture, I'm like, it's not my culture, because my culture is the way I eat, it's the way I dance, it's the way we tell stories, and the way we clothe, right? It shouldn't be harmful. It should never harm you.
Dr. Ayman Hussein, a psychologist with over 6 years of experience in areas surrounding grief, depression, and more specifically FGM.
Think about the media and the impact of the media. In the UK, it was sort of like there was a lot of talk around FGM, but also how it's barbaric, how like if someone has been cut and is in their sort of like early young women specifically, how they can then see and how alienating that can be, because then sort of like knowing that this has happened to me, and then being seen like, oh, my family are then seen as barbaric.
This perspective is shared by Warda Mohammed, an activist, community ambassador of the Avengers, and a survivor herself.
It is barbaric, but using these terms are offensive to us survivors, because the people you're calling barbaric are everyone from our culture, you know, and it feels like you're calling my whole people barbaric. So am I bringing shame? Am I adding to stereotypes by associating FGM to my people? And then I used to get stuck in my head. So then for years I went not wanting to talk about it, and I never talked about it. If I'm honest with you, I'm turning 38 this year, and I was 31 years old the first time anyone ever asked me if I had FGM.
What role do survivor voices play in creating change, and how can the media better represent their stories in a sense?
Well, the media needs to identify them, and the only way they're going to identify them is if they do like open calls and stuff like that, rather than going to the same old people all the time, because that's all they do. They're lazy. They're very lazy. There's enough survivors, but they just go to the same old people, the same old organizations, just get them. What they've by doing this, what it's done is there's people that have made a career out of advocacy against FGM, and that's all they can do. That's all they want to do, because it's so niche. What that does is it becomes about the person, not about the cause.
You're listening to Beyond the Silence with me, Blessing Adefemi. Then there's the racial dimension to consider. It's so surprised that when the media reports on issues affecting non-white communities, those stories are often underrepresented and rarely conveyed with the same sense of urgency or importance. Back to Hoda.
So, why do you think FGM is not as widely discussed in the UK compared to other forms of violence against women?
That's a very good question. But the simplest answer to say is the way female genital mutilation that was talked about in the Western world, was an African issue. It was never talked about it's a worldwide issue. It was never talked about it can happen to any girl, but it was talked about in a way it was only it happens to Black and brown girls. Now, fast forward in Western world where we are at, We are still the lowest because Black women are always fighting their rights. Black women are always fighting for their jobs. You'll have the same experience or even more when you go for a job, and the white woman will get it before she gets you, before you get the job, right? So with FGM, it's a political. Female genital mutilation, it became a political, especially in the Western world. One, it became a political, and secondly, it became a business. Because if you look back, all the people who always talk about FGM and making this law are white people at the top, right? Secondly, the way they look at it is an African issue. So why would they put money out there? Why would they make it something that that need to be talked about? It need to be educational. No, it's only 2013 or 2010, it said, when movement started happening. That's the only time you see actually anything is happening in this country. We had a law that's been made 1985 that was amended 2003. Nothing has happened. It's only 2000. Fast forward from 2010 to now, that when survivors who are professionals, when Layla made the cruel cut, the documentary is called The Cruel Cut. That was the first time I showed my face. That was 2013, which is why the law was changed. It was us. It was us who changed the law. It was us who made the movement. We had a petition signed. We had 100,000 people sign of this. We demanded change. But they don't want the change because it's not important. That is why that female genital mutilation is still overlooked. It's still overlooked because it's still thing. It's the Black and brown girl issue. And we need to make a change. And also that takes all of us to get together and demand change. So that is one of the reasons. It's about race. Also, when you think about, we have 3 persecution here in the UK, right? If a little white girl, her hand was being cut, it will be an uproar. It will literally be an uproar. It will be on TV. It will be in everywhere. But we have a little girls who died because of their clitoris were cut or removed. And you never want to talk about it, but you have a law that's supposed to protect them. This is what it is. It's racism, and it's racism unfold. It's all folded together. It's just about us who have to demand this. We have to make this change.
Imagine constantly hearing the same negative narratives repeated about you, your identity, your community, your culture. Imagining that alone feels so isolating and alienating, like you're being cast to the other. And that's exactly how the media often position people when discussing FGM. But that's far from the approach I wanted to take. This isn't about reinforcing harmful stereotypes, it's about challenging them and uncovering the full truth of what FGM really is, through the voices and experiences of those who lived it. We will now be hearing survivors retell their personal experiences with female genital mutilation. Some listeners may find the content distressing. Please take care while listening and feel free to pause or skip this section if needed. Warda opened up about her personal experiences with the practice, revealing the real reason why it was performed on her. A reasoning that goes against the simplified and misleading narratives portrayed in the media.
My mum didn't want me to have FGM done, but she was pressured. She was pressured. Mum was a migrant. She was an orphan. She was living here. All her family were back home. She didn't have any support network. My dad remained here, but my dad's family forced us to have FGM. But the reason why they wanted us to get it done, or me to get it done in particular, is because they felt like I was too confident and I questioned things. And because I grew up here, so this man who looks like my dad, who lives in Africa, who's my dad's younger brother, wants to be able to threaten me and tell me off. But I'm sorry, Ian Bill is more like an uncle figure to me, from EastEnders. And in England, only my parents can discipline me. Like, I'm not used to having strangers. Like, you be respectful, but over there, they didn't want me to be respectful. They wanted me to be subservient and obedient. He just wanted me to get up because he walked into the room, or let the men eat before the women eat, and silly little things that I wasn't used to. So he felt like I needed to be humbled.
Hoda also opened up about her own equally traumatic experience and the complications that came along with it.
Female genital mutilation, I thought, is something happens to everybody. I didn't think it's only, one, I didn't think it was an abuse, or I didn't think it doesn't happen. It's something that I thought happens to everybody around the world. And so for me, my turning point was at first at the age of 11. So the initial cutting, it was fine. I survived. But when I turned 11, that's when I started getting sick because my period was accumulating inside. There was nowhere to come out. So that is how I came to Europe. Me and my dad came to Italy when I was 16 to get more medical help. And the first time I had my period, I was 17 years old. So from the age of 11 to the age of 17, I was in hospital, trying, all doctors trying to get my period out. And from there, once I started my period at the age of 17, also my country became a war torn. So we couldn't go. So I ended up in a refugee camp in Holland, straight from in Italy, the hospital. So when I'm arrived in here in the UK, it was just 2 months before my 21st birthday. I always wanted to be a nurse. I always wanted to make a difference. But there was not a lot of things in place. And for me, I always had gynecology since I was 11 years old. So when I moved to the UK, I started getting sick again. So I would be bleeding more, where before I wasn't bleeding. So again, I have to go back to gynecology, but I realized the knowledge wasn't there. Like when I'm talking and I'm explaining my problems and FGM, and I just become the educator.
The impact that this practice had on both women was truly life-changing. It was as if a part of them was taken and stripped away from them. And in reality, that's exactly what happened. They didn't have a choice or say when it came to their bodies. Warda explains the effects on her.
And then I came back. When I came back to the UK, I started high school. And I wasn't the same little girl anymore. I was no longer interested in riding my bike. I wasn't interested in physical sports. I wasn't interested in doing trampolining. I wasn't confident. I was retraced. I went there loving Spice Girls and believing in girl power and all of that, to coming back and hating being a woman because everything bad's just happening to me now that I'm becoming a woman.
And so does Hoda.
It took away from me my childhood. It took away from me a chance to be a mother, to have my own child. It took away the option, my own husband to have a child, because my husband is not from Somalia. He's not from practicing community. He's born in London. His parents are from Barbados. And, he was born here and grew up here. But also it denied him to be a father, right? And so it took everything away from me.
But neither woman allowed for their experiences to define the person they became and the story that would continue.
But it didn't took my soul away. So that's why I always say that I'm the luckiest girl alive. And that's why the work I do, I will keep on doing it. Because one, the story need to be told. There are so many stories need to be told. And as an African, storytelling is part of my culture.
It took me a long time to realize why. And I grieve for the person that I think I might have potentially turned into if that didn't happen to me when I was so young. If I didn't have that confidence and self-esteem beat it out of me. So every day when I speak at events, or I take care of myself, or I treat myself, or I speak big about myself, or I'm trying, people are like, oh, you seem so cocky, or you seem so arrogant, or whatever. That makes me smile, because it's been so hard to get to a point where I can speak so highly of myself and value myself. So if you're saying that, then you have no idea how far I've come. And I'm trying to, and for me, it's almost like a revenge, because I wasn't supposed to be confident, outspoken, or powerful in positions that I am in. I wasn't supposed to be. And I'm trying to make up for the person that I think I could have been before it's too late, if that makes sense.
To be honest, after finishing my conversation with both these women, I cried. I cried not because I could fully grasp their pain. I know I can't, but because even the empathy I felt barely scratches the surface of what they've endured. I find it so unfair that, as women, so much of our existence is constantly policed. It often feels like we drew the short end of the stick. Like every day there's something new reminding us that everything we do must be done to appease someone else but ourselves. And yet, amidst all that pain, what moved me the most was the strength of these two women. The ability to transform trauma into power. They chose to use their stories, their voices, to advocate for change and stop the practice from happening to other women. Hearing their stories made it painfully clear that the trauma of FGM isn't just physical, it runs deep. We spoke again to Dr. Ayman Hussein, a psychologist who also specializes in supporting survivors of FGM. How does FGM-related trauma compare to other forms of gender-based violence in terms of its psychological effects?
I think for FGM, there is something about something's been taken away from them, being held down, but being held down by people who you know and trust, your grandmother or your aunt. There is something that, in terms of with the psyche, if you think about the human mind, what the child can interpret is that there's something so wrong with me that this happened to me. I think that has a profound effect, especially because it is also a child. Everything will be re-traumatizing. Like going to a GP and sort of like, if you have an exam, cervical smear, it would be terrorizing for someone who's already is dealing with a psychological impact. There's something about that it might not be just a one-off trauma. It's a continuous trauma.
Her point is also mirrored by Naya Makami, an emergency medic and owner of the Peony Wave in Kenya.
Do you think the health and psychological impacts of FGM are underestimated compared to other forms of violence against women?
Yes, especially the long-term trauma and health risks are definitely overlooked. For me, mostly the psychological part of it. I feel like we are trying to get to a point where your mental health matters. We're not there yet. So I do have cases where a survivor comes to me, they are maybe 46 years old. And when they try to talk to someone and they say that I have this feeling of unworthiness, I feel like I have low self-esteem, I'm not able to get back to the world, I don't have a social life, I'm not able to work, I feel depressed because I underwent female genital mutilation. They're stigmatized because someone is like, come on, this is something that you've lived with for such a long time. Why would it affect you now? But as you grow, you get to understand that you're different. There are so many things about you that are different. So yeah, it is very sad. As much as the impact is severe, it's definitely overlooked.
You're listening to Beyond the Silence with me, Blessing Adefemi. I'm left reflecting not only on the stories shared, but on the urgent need for continued support. Currently, the NHS have not yet established any recent documentation on FGM cases in the UK. But last year, from January to March, over 2,000 women and girls were identified to have had FGM done on them. While the strength of survivors and activists is undeniable, their work and their healing can't continue without real sustained funding. Warda gave me her opinion on this.
I feel like with the way funding is in the UK, they really tried to lump a lot of things that shouldn't be lumped in. And I feel like when people talk about violence against women and girls, there's branches of it. So there's domestic violence and, the killing and the rape of women. There's the rape of women, and domestic violence is like the big one where most of funding goes to. And then it's like some strands go toward honor killings and stuff like that. So then it goes to like big charities. And then when it comes to FGM, it's like the least of the least. It's the least. It's like the tag along. It feels like it's all to do with funding and it's all to do with politics. I feel like the big organizations swallow up FGM to boost their funding.
I'm currently standing outside Sheffield City Council, where I recently sent out a Freedom of Information request surrounding the treatment of FGM. Their response? There is no dedicated policy regarding FGM. We use generic policies for children's services. We do have a dedicated team that take all cases where FGM is a safeguarding concern for children, and we have a general guidance document and a dedicated process pathway. However, it is not known whether there are any council-funded support services available for FGM survivors, like counselling, or any community awareness initiatives or educational programs. This is exactly why more tailored and proactive approaches are so urgently needed. Without this, it can leave both survivors and professionals feeling and being clueless when a generic document, not specific to FGM, is issued to them. And while there are charities already in place who are fighting to educate the public and aid the women affected, it almost feels like their existence alone relieves these institutions from doing any work. Why must everything be put on their shoulders? How can we combat this issue when it feels like one party is doing more of the work? I also sent out FOIs to the Department of Health and Social Care, who said all healthcare staff must complete safeguarding training, which includes a focus on FGM at every level within the NHS. This gives staff the skills to identify FGM where appropriate and the knowledge of what support is available, so they can refer survivors to appropriate care, such as specialist FGM clinics. However, we do not hold information on the content of these training materials, as these courses are not developed by the Department of Health and Social Care. But is that enough? Dr. Hilary Barrage, an academic and activist against FGM, shared her opinion on this.
Maternity clinics are a bit late, particularly because women who have that sort of problem, if I can call it that, are quite often reluctant, for instance, to go and have their smear test because they think it's going to hurt and they think somebody's going to see what happened, and then they're going to get questioned, and then there's going to be this, are you going to let your daughters have it, and all this sort of business. Or they're just scared. So those most likely to have had FGM are not the people most likely to turn up for regular obstetric or gynecological checks. So we've got to think about that and think, how do we address that? So that is one thing. The straight NHS provision has to be strong enough to meet a woman in whatever way she appears. And of course, it's also important to have paediatric gynecology, because quite often it's a child that has it and she may have problems, for instance, when she starts to menstruate and nobody knows what's going on and she's in pain and all this business. So there has to be enough training that doctors will pick it up. I've always said to medics, if I've been doing a presentation or something, you have maximum 30 seconds to get your face right and say the right thing if you discover that there's FGM. Probably less than that, probably 10 seconds. Because if you look shocked or horrified or upset, the lady is likely just to get off the bed and disappear because she doesn't want to engage with somebody who's upset herself about it.
A clear pathway and major improvements need to be implemented if you want FGM to end. It may not be today or tomorrow, but progress is possible. If the narrative and the lack of proper education surrounding this harmful practice can be changed and reshaped to reflect the truth that FGM is a violation to the rights of a woman to her own body, change is most definitely possible. But for real lasting change to happen, the government must take a more active role through policy, funding, education, and accountability, as well as the need for the media to portray FGM authentically and correctly. This isn't just a women's issue, it's a societal issue, one that affects men and boys too, because FGM is often carried out for their perceived benefit. Ending it means engaging everyone, not just survivors, but communities, institutions, and those in power. On next week's episode of Beyond the Silence, we will be discussing the history and culture surrounding colorism and the impacts it has today. As this episode draws to a close, if anything in today's episode has been distressing or difficult to hear, please know you're not alone. I encourage you to speak to a trusted professional or seek support from organisations that specialise in trauma and survivor care. Your well-being matters and there's always help available. I'd also like to end on this note.
This is not about black or white. This is about humanity. This is about speaking. This is about making a difference. So no matter who you are, no matter what your color is or what your beliefs are, you can stand with us and you can end this and reach out, get the knowledge you need, and we will support you.